Couture, head of Generation Ratify, a nationwide youth movement working for ERA ratification. Linda Coberly, chair of the ERA Coalition Legal Task Force, and many other things. Congresswoman Jackie Speier, sponsor of the successful bill in the House of Representatives that dissolved the time limit on the ERA. Maryland Senator Ben Cardin, lead sponsor of SJ Res 6, the Senate bill to remove the time limit on the ERA. And Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski by video, also lead sponsor of SJ Res 6, the Senate bill to remove the time limit on the ERA. And greetings, I am Carol Jenkins. I am co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. We are comprised of over 100 organizations of women and girls across this country who want equality. These organizations represent millions of girls and women. And one of the things that we are working on expressly is the Equal Rights Amendment. And not only girls and women, we also have men supporters. And at this point, I would like to bring in one of our major male supporters and a leader in the Senate for us, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. Thank you so much for being with us today, Senator Cardin. I want you to talk a little bit about your passion for equality for girls and women.
Well, Carol, first of all, thank you for your extraordinary leadership in the ERA Coalition. Thank you. We're gonna get this done. We need to get this done. America needs to continue to lead on human rights, and as we know, women's rights are human rights, and we've got to get this to the finish line. We're so close. So thank you for all of your hard work on this. It's a real honor to work with Lisa Murkowski. You've got a Republican and a Democrat working together. This should not be a partisan issue. When you were talking about the values to make America the great nation it is that we demand equal opportunity for all, and it needs to be in our Constitution. So we got to get this done. My passion is basically because I believe in human rights. I believe America's strength is in its values. I believe this nation is a great nation because of what we believe in. And it really pains me at times when I see we move in the wrong direction. I've seen that whenever we face some really tough times like a pandemic, it just underscores the problems of inequality in America. And we have to all work to make sure we eliminate that inequality. And particularly, we make sure our Constitution speaks to our values. That's what my passion is about. That's why I want to get this done.
Well, we're so glad to have you in that leadership role. We know that you are in a time crunch. You all are so busy working, but let me introduce Maddie Budendorf from Davidson College in North Carolina, who has a question she'd like to ask you.
Hi, I'm obviously Maddie. I'm representing Davidson College today. Thank you all so much for participating. My question is, how can we help to A, move your bill that removes the time limit from the ERA SJ Res 6 forward in the Senate, but then B, what is the most effective way for us to be targeting sitting senators who are not up for re-election, like my Senator Burr in North Carolina?
Well, Maddie, first of all, thank you for getting involved. We need your help. This is your generation that we are really fighting to make sure it has equality in our Constitution. There are still hurdles that we have to overcome it, as you know. I think the most effective argument you can make is one of basic policy and values and politics. You want to be on the wrong side of this issue. We know that the power of the woman vote in our election has been really underscored of late. And yes, the Equal Rights Amendment is something that's favored by all people who believe in basic rights and human rights and equality. But it's particularly valuable, I think, to point out to a member of the Senate who's not up for re-election that they will be up for election at some point, and that do they really want to be on the wrong side of history? Do they really want to be on the wrong side of this issue and go to the voters and say, well, I don't really care that much about equal rights for women? I just don't think you want to be on that side of this argument. And I think it's a powerful point. Secondly, this is not partisan, shouldn't be partisan. There hasn't been a constitution enacted since the end of World War II that doesn't have an Equal Rights Amendment in it. The United States is now an outlier in this. Do you really want to be part of the fact that we're not even in mainstream among the global community in regards to the protections of our Constitution. I think you point that out. I would hope that any fair-minded member of the Senate would be willing to listen and support this important legislation.
Thank you so much, Senator. We got a tremendous response to this town hall, hundreds of people who wanted to join, and well over 100 questions, which is so unusual. You know, people want to come, but you know, there are lots of questions. Kelly Gibson, who is a basketball coach at Syracuse University, and also played college basketball for the University of Maryland. I'm going to read her question.
A Turk, that's great.
Yeah, I'm going to read her question for you. She says, the sports world has been abuzz with political mindedness in recent years, especially women and minorities. What can be done to bring them more awareness about the importance of the ERA?
Well, let me thank Kelly for that question. And the team played on was an incredible team at the University of Maryland. So we're very proud of her accomplishments on the court and off the court. I think the most effective point a sports figure can do, or anyone who has a following, is to explain to your audience that the Constitution of the United States does not provide for the equal rights based upon gender. I think that's a shocker to most people. People don't realize that we don't have this in the Constitution. They think this has already been done. So we've tried to get that message across, but there's a whole audience out there that has not really heard that point. And when you talk to a sports figure, you talk to someone who has a big following, I think if you underscore that point, that the Equal Rights Amendment is not in the federal Constitution. It was the late Justice Scalia that said, there's nothing in the Constitution that requires discrimination against women, but there's nothing in the Constitution that protects against discrimination against for women. So I think when you make that point, they recognize that, gee, I better get involved in this. And yes, maybe I'll write some letters, maybe I'll make some phone calls, maybe I'll bring this up at one of my peer groups and make this a cause. We need a broader audience understanding the fact that we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution, that it's important. We saw in COVID-19 that our healthcare system is not fair based upon gender. The economic challenges that businesses are facing are not fair based upon gender ownership. So we know that there is inequalities in this country, and we need to have the fundamental protection in our Constitution in order to make sure we eliminate that inequality.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. We have you on the screen now. Would you like to respond to this, Senator?
Fellow Marylander, how are you?
Kelly, I'm fine, thank you.
All right, good. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you guys. I mean, to kind of ditto some of the things that you already elaborated on, you know, I'm new to this whole amendment. I just recently found out this year. And so my whole point is how do we continue to just bring this to the forefront, especially with some of the athletes, professional athletes that have a bigger platform and that can continue to use their power and use their voice to make change and to see change. And so that's kind of where I am with this whole thing. That's my industry, it's the sports industry. And so I know, you know, and particularly with racial issues, you know, professional athletes show up. And so how can we kind of equal that playing field with an issue with dealing with racial, with a sexual bias in this country?
Well, Kelly, I think very important point. Let me just underscore the one issue here. I think we will always remember and admire the courage of our women's soccer team.
Yes, yes.
And what they did for equal pay for equal work. It was really a moment that everybody stopped and really understood the issue. So you have an audience. I think you have an audience, and you have to tell your stories about what you had to go through as an athlete. You did not get the same respect as your male counterpart. That's wrong in America at any time, but particularly now, this part of history. Don't you want to be part of being on the right side of America's path towards equality. And you can be part of it, or you just want to sit on the sidelines. What are you going to tell your children and grandchildren?
Very true.
So be there.
Okay,
Well, thank you.
thank you both so much. Thank you. That was a great conversation. And Senator Cardin, I know that you have pressing things to do. We're just so thrilled that you were able to stop by our town hall to share your leadership and your expertise. We're there for you, whatever we could do. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And again, thank the whole coalition, everyone who's on this conference. Keep up the work. We're gonna be able to celebrate, I think, shortly a victory. We just got to keep the momentum going.
Okay, thanks so much. We're with you on that, a victory. That's what we need. Thank you, Senator Cardin. Well, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who is the co-lead on SJ Res 6, was not able to join us tonight, but we did an interview with her earlier today. So let's take a look at that and we'll pick up on the other side. Senator Murkowski, thank you so much for joining our town hall today and for your extraordinary leadership on SJ Res 6, the dissolving of the timeline on the ERA. I'd like for you to speak for a couple of minutes because I've heard you and it's so persuasive about your passion for equality for girls and women.
Well, you know, thank you for that, Carol, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion and really for the leadership that we are seeing around the country as we work to ensure that level of equality that I think for so many of us, we have just always assumed that it will be there. But in fairness, ensuring that it is clearly there in law is something that remains unfinished. I'm reminded that in the state of Alaska, we were very early adopters of the Equal Rights Amendment. It was April 5th of 1972.
Very early, very early.
One of the very, very early ones. And so for us in Alaska, we get a lot of the, what do you mean the rest of the country has not yet stepped into this? How can other states not have joined? What is happening? Why not? And so this was just a real direct reminder to me that there is no timeline on equality for women. And so this effort that Senator Cardin and I have been involved with to make sure that there is a clear path forward for ratification, that there is nothing that would limit us legislatively, a roadblock there. This is what we're attempting to advance, and we need that support from around the country, not only from those states that have not yet moved out of their own state legislatures this support for ratification, but even states like mine that have for 40 plus years been supporters and recognize and acknowledge the need for this. So this is again, at this time of COVID-19, we're all using the phrase, we're all in this together. Well, I think the same holds true as we seek to ensure that women's true equality are there in our Constitution.
When the House passed Jackie Speier's bill to dissolve the time limit, which seems like a century ago, but was just a couple of months ago, so much has happened since then. Were you encouraged by that? Did that give you hope for your bill in the Senate, that there would be some movement?
It did give me hope because we recognize that every legislative effort out there, everything that demonstrates some level of progress is something that we should be celebrating. So the House has moved, as you say, that does seem like just eons ago. We have work to do in the Senate, and I think we knew that going into this, but we've got some work that we have to do. And in fairness, we've got a lot of work to do on the Republican side of the aisle. In my view, this should not be a partisan issue at all. And I want to make sure that we work to break down some of that partisan aspect to what we have encountered.
Right.
So I do feel encouraged by the House's activities, and know that, again, we've got a lot of work to do on the Senate side.
Right. So it's your terrific leadership and Susan Collins, just 2 Republicans so far. Do you think that there is a way to get more Republicans in this session? And if you get more Republicans, will it come to a floor vote? Or is there any, do you see any hope for that this time around? Or we'll answer that, or do we need to wait for the next session?
I mean, we may need to wait, and part of the reason for that is there is so much uncertainty presently with regards to legislation of any kind, because of the very concentrated focus on where we are in reacting to the pandemic, the impact not only on the health side, but on the economy side. And it seems that so many other issues that were relatively high profile have just been taken down several notches, not because they're not important, but because there is such an immediacy to so many of the other issues that we're dealing with. And then, of course, you have the reality of a presidential election in just
so much.
a few months. And again, say that it shouldn't be partisan, but when you get closer to elections, it is made a partisan issue. Shouldn't necessarily be a partisan.
What can we do? All of the people watching this town hall, participating, they want to know, what can we do to help you in your effort to get the time limit removed from the ERA?
Well, I think one of the things that we should remember is that, well, again, there is immediate focus on what is going on with the response to the pandemic.
Right.
But keep in mind, this is 2020, all right? This is the 100th anniversary, the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote.
Right.
We should be seizing on that anniversary to motivate and activate. And yes, I know there's great focus in so many other areas, but let's not overlook the significance of this centennial recognition, and to be able to use those venues where we are celebrating that, as we should, but with a recognition that we have some work that needs to be done that has been delayed for decades now, and move this. It should be an issue as you are talking to candidates in your state for the state legislature, for governor. You should be raising it with them. It should be an issue that they have to respond to. How do they feel about that? Are they going to be supporting it? Not only will they be supporting it, but how will they be advocating for it? And so I do think we have a couple different things that are happening here that will move forward. Maybe more of it will be virtually as opposed to rallies, but we can figure that one out too. We can use the technologies to help us. But let's recognize that with the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote, and again, the fact that you have elections that are coming up, let's use these to our advantage.
It should be a question of every candidate in coming up. Great.
Absolutely.
Senator Murkowski, we want to thank you so much for being a part of our town hall, and continued good luck in pushing for equality for women and girls. And we hope that it will happen soon. If not this session, next session. But we're definitely going to emphasize
we don't give up on it
this year. Great. Thank you so much, Senator Murkowski. And we thank the senator so much. Her last words, we don't give up on this year. And we do want to make note that we are recording this town hall for future viewing. And we hope you will bring your friends to it if you're not watching it now. It's also on Facebook. Facebook Live. Now we would like to introduce one of our heroes of 2020, Congresswoman Jackie Speier, who managed to bring forth such an effort that the House of Representatives dissolved the time limit on the ERA. Congresswoman Speier, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, Carol, it's great to be with you and Bettina, and glad to hear Senator Cardin and Murkowski stay absolutely committed to this issue. I must say that when we took this bill up on the House floor, there was a sense of history being made. You were there, you felt it, I'm sure.
Right.
And we are at the pinnacle. We just need to get that one last vote undertaken on the Senate side to make it a reality. I think what has come home so clearly to me with the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis is that once again, women are on the front lines. We are the front lines and we're still at the back of the line. Whether it's in the nursing homes where for the most part, it's women providing the care, being exposed to the virus, getting low pay. Those working in the grocery stores, again, women for the most part, again, getting lower pay. Those in the childcare settings. And I think we need to recognize that this is going to continue until we have the ERA in the Constitution of the United States. So as I'm sure you've heard many times, we are done with being second-class citizens. We're done with getting lower pay. We're done with the violence that occurs to women. We're done. And the ERA is going to take us to the level of equality. And that's all we're looking for, just the equal playing field on which to work and play and continue our lives.
Yeah, one of the things that struck us all at that news conference that Speaker Pelosi held, and you spoke so powerfully about, was that you, the most powerful woman in the world, well, in the country, Nancy Pelosi, you know, when she stepped out of those halls, was no better than a second-class citizen. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Well, in truth, when we're sitting in the Capitol, when we're on the House floor, you know, all of us are basically equal. We get the same pay, we have the same vote. There is an equality there that frankly doesn't exist anywhere else. And when we walk out of that Capitol, we are relegated to a second-class citizenship as compared to our male colleagues that serve in that same body. So it's not lost on us. It's not lost on any woman who has had to fight to get just basic. I'm always reminded of the Piggy Young story, who, because she got pregnant, was forced to take leave without pay and without health insurance because they could not accommodate the fact that she could not lift more than 25 pounds. But when they went to court and went through discovery, they found out men who had heart attacks or diabetes and had accommodation requests for not lifting more than 20 or 25 pounds, they were accommodated. And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And yet it ended up being remanded and negotiated because not only did they have to show that UPS discriminated, which it clearly had, the plaintiff here had to show, Peggy Young, had to show that it was intentional. So until we can be at a point where it is a suspect category like so many others, or race and religion, where you don't have to prove the intention. All you have to prove is that there was that form of discrimination. Then again, we continue our second-class citizenship. 156 countries around the world already have this in their constitutions. We lack.
Yeah, Congresswoman, we have a question for you. Ella Daniels from the University of Iowa. Ella?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. As she said, I'm Ella Daniels. I'm from the University of Iowa. And I would like to discuss the intersectionality of the ERA, especially as it pertains to the LGBTQ plus community.
So, you know, there's a part of me that feels that we'll have greater equality for LGBTQ before we will have it for gender. There is a greater likelihood that that will happen before we see it for the ERA. And I hate saying it, but that's my concern. Now, as the legislation is drafted, if it were to be placed in the Constitution, I think by virtue of gender or sex no longer being the form on which you can discriminate, where it's clearly stated in our Constitution, it certainly would apply to the LGBTQ community as well. But when I look at marriage equality already having taken place and this effort to make sure that the LGBTQ community is not discriminated based on employment, I somehow feel that the community is farther along than women in general.
Well, thank you. Those are sobering words for us, Congresswoman. I know that you have such a hectic schedule, and we were forewarned by your busy staff too that you would be able to come on and then had to leave to take care of other issues. So we want to thank you so much for being here. Please stay for as long as you can, but I know you have a full agenda, and we want to thank you again for that tremendous victory in the House of Representatives, and we look forward to another celebration with you, hopefully very soon.
Well, it was a privilege to be on the front lines with each and every one of you, and a thrilling moment for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, perhaps picking up on the intersectionality question, Senator Pat Spearman is with us. She's, of course, from Nevada, and gave us that crucial initial state that got us moving. Senator Spearman, can we have a few words from you? We'll do some opening remarks, brief opening remarks, and then we'll lead into some more questions. Senator Spearman.
Thank you. This is my great niece. This is Gabby. And Gabby will be 8 next month. She's going into the 3rd grade in August. And as I listened and talked, and I listened to what Congresswoman Spear said, you know, the tragic thing is that we're still at a place in our history where we have to separate and segregate people who are marginalized, and we all have to fight. It seems that we have to fight in compartments. And so people often ask me what drove my passion for bringing the ERA. I'm an African-American woman. That's 2 strikes right there. And you add the third thing, that I am also a member of the LGBTQ community. And you all have heard me say it before. You have to be a Disney character to be more marginalized than someone in my position. Okay. So when I come to the table, I bring all of the fight. I bring all of the fight for everyone who is marginalized. And I looked at Gabby and I said, you know, by the time she gets into high school, whatever happens in Congress in the next 2 years, she will be reading about it in her 10th grade US history. Now that's something for those who think that they have time to wait. The person, when they look at this tape and they see her, she's 8 years old and she's listening to us talk about it. And when she gets to be 16, she will be reading about this in the history books, and the history books will record whether or not people were on the right side of this history or whether they stood on the sidelines and watched history be made. And so for me, the fight is really about equality, equality, equality. And I'll tell you, you know, my patience is starting to wear thin on people who don't get that. Because, you know, the COVID-19 has brought out, has manifested or have magnified all of the things that we've been dealing with all of these years. You know, we look at women who are now under stay-at-home orders at home. And I'm glad that smart governors are looking at that and saying we don't want to exacerbate this bad situation. But some of them are staying at home and they are in abusive relationships. And then when they call for help, often they have to justify why they're afraid of their abuser. We have people, we have women who are being trafficked more and more in this environment because of economic reasons. And then they have to justify why they are a victim. And so my patience really is growing very thin with people who don't want to do this. This is the time to get it done. And I'm thanking everyone who's in Congress. I thank Congresswoman Spearman, I thank Senator Cardin, I thank Senator Murkowski, everyone. And our entire federal delegation and from Nevada, I'm proud to say, is in support of the ERA. So we're going to get it done. We're going to get it done. We're going to get it.
Great. I know we will, especially with you in the leadership as well. Steve Andersson from Illinois, a Republican, pro-life, and also now a member of the board of the ERA Coalition, Fund for Women's Equality. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to continue this dialogue. We started it, a week and a half ago, and I was thrilled when I got the invitation that there were a ton of questions that wanted to be asked. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about me because that's not important. I'm excited about answering the questions that the students or whomever is participating have. I do want to talk very, very briefly about my view of the strategy of how to get this done. And my view of that is that all of the states that are left, and remember, we don't want to stop at 38, we got Virginia, but all the states that are left, and I want to get them all, are mostly Republican dominated states. And the Senate, where we want to get the deadline removed, is controlled at present by the Republicans, my party. Means that the whole approach that we have to take has to be different. As much as I appreciated Senator Cardin's comments about being on the right side of history, and I certainly am on the right side of history, very proud to be on the right side of that history, that oftentimes isn't going to be enough. So we have to talk about strategies that can convince Republicans to vote for this. Because if you ask the question in the abstract, do you support women's rights? The answer is sure, of course. Who doesn't, right? I guess there might be a few who might say otherwise, but most people would say, of course. But if you ask the Republican, but what about abortion, right? This trumped up, made up, falsely associated with the ERA allegation. If you ask them about that, the answer starts to change. And so if you want to know how we change this, is we have to defeat that argument. We can't ignore it. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it directly and why it's a lie and why it's wrong. So I'm hoping that we'll get into that a little bit, but I'm just thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Rosie Couture, almost 1,000 students nationwide working for the ERA. Yeah. And you're a sophomore in high school?
Yes, although I'm not doing that much schoolwork at the moment.
Right. So if you could tell us, this impetus is just, we're so excited when we see the work that you're doing in social media, in organizing. Talk a little bit about your passion for the ERA.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the introduction. I am Rosie. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Generation Ratify, which is the youth-led movement to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And we are all about mobilizing youth and engaging youth in the fight to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. As Carol was saying, we do a lot of social media and digital events, which is awesome that we have the experience with that. So going into this pandemic, we are still ready to keep on the fight. But really why we were made was to provide an outlet for kids to get involved in the fight to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Because I think including young people, the generation that is really going to be affected most, is going to feel the effects of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment the most, is really involved in the fight to ratify it. And I'm also so glad to be on this panel among so many incredible people. I am fangirling and starstruck being on a panel with all of the incredible lawmakers and activists and lawyers. But I'm so glad that I get to be on here and represent the youth voice. And I'm so glad that there are so many young people engaged in this and asking questions. And I'm very excited to answer some of those questions. But yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie. And now Linda Coberly, our legal eagle. Thank you so much for being here. We've been watching you organize for these legal fights that are taking place around the ERA. So give us an update. Where do we stand? Is this all going to happen overnight?
No, it hasn't happened overnight yet, and it's not going to happen overnight now. So I am a lawyer. I'm actually not an activist, and I, I've learned a lot in this process. This is the first activism thing I've been involved in. I'm an advocate all the time. I argue in court. I argued in court this morning on this same iPad, sitting in this same chair, because we're all doing this stuff remotely now. So I'm used to advocating, but I'm not used to being an activist. And I've learned so much in this process. And one of the things I've learned is that there's a role for lawyers to play, because this thing we're doing with the Constitution is a law thing. And it is about changing our nation's fundamental government document. And there's lots of questions that have come up, and I'm happy to answer as many of those today as I can about how this works, how ratification works, how it's supposed to work, what about time limits, all of these things. And those are questions that we're dealing with when we talk with legislators. And now they're questions that we're dealing with when we talk to courts. There are now 2 lawsuits pending that will address whether the time limit on the ERA is effective to stop the ratification now that 3/4 of the states have actually voted to ratify. And we can give you an update on those lawsuits, which are pending in court. But one of the things I wanted to share with you just as we get started is something I've learned as someone new to activism, and that I suspect some of you who are students are learning too as you enter the world of activism. And that is the importance of listening. I have learned so much from people in Illinois who worked with our Republican legislators, like Representative Andersson. And it's always a thrill to be appearing with you, sir, on panels like this, because I know the role that you played in Illinois. And I've learned so much from talking with Senator Spearman and others about how to really speak to issues of intersectionality, which are so incredibly important when you're dealing with a fight like this, especially when you're talking with young people who I think we have so much to learn from. And that's the other thing I want to say, is that I think all of us learn from you, Rosie, and from other people like you and who have a different perspective to bring. I've learned from talking to my daughters who are 17 and 20 and bring a different perspective to this than I brought, and a different experience. And I've learned talking with women of color who have fought different fights that I couldn't possibly imagine and couldn't pretend to imagine. So I hope that as activists, we all can learn from each other in terms of understanding how to persuade people and how to speak to people and how to make sure that this really is an intersectional movement.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. Now we do have some questions from, as we said, we've gotten lots of questions. And this first one is for Pat Spearman, Senator Spearman, if you and Gabby are still with us. Leanne Latrell DiLorenzo from Oregon, one of our very ardent ERA supporters, has a question. And Bettina Hager, who's our DC director, is going to share that question. And if we could find Leanne in the mix, we'll bring her up. So go ahead, Bettina Hager.
Hi, yes, and Leanne, I know you're out there, but if you could rename, we'd be glad to bring you up. So, but for now, I will ask the question on behalf of Leanne, and this is to Senator Pat Spearman. Why do you think the American people aren't aware that America is far behind many other countries with respect to women's rights, but the image of America is that it's the most progressive for women? And first of all, and I've worked with you for so many years. Thank you so much, Senator Spearman, for all that you do. But question to you.
Thank you. And I just want to echo the comments that Carol made about you, Rosie. We're doing this, and we're probably, some of us may be like the people who started the Golden Gate Bridge. We're planting the seeds of grapes, of wine, which we may never drink, but we're going to still do that anyway. So I think that one of the things that has happened is, as Congresswoman Spear said, when you look at LGBTQ rights, marriage equality, and that sort of thing, it's almost like, well, this is a no-brainer. Surely women are in the Constitution. When you look at things like the Voting Rights Act, when you look at equal housing, you look at all the things that happened in the Civil Rights Movement, in the 60s and the 70s and some of the 80s, people automatically assume this must mean that the gender piece has already been resolved. And that's why I constantly say, every time I speak about this, I constantly say, we have to fight these battles comprehensively, because we've got to let people know that we are not yet free. No one is free until everyone is free. And we've got to make sure that equality across the board, it must be in the Constitution. It must be in the Constitution. And all of those things, yes, we have marriage equality. Yes, members of the LGBTQ community can adopt children. All of those things are true. But what is not true is that the US women's soccer team, who brought the kind of glory to that sport that had been missing for so many years, after they won, had to fight for equal pay. That's crazy. I mean, if it's not crazy, it's crazy making. You know, how does that happen? How does that happen? So people don't think that this is still an issue, because they've looked at so many other areas of civil rights and see where we've been progressive. But this indeed is one where we have not progressed enough, and it's time for a change.
Great, thank you, Senator. We found Leanne. Hi, Leanne. Do you want to respond to that? Do you have thoughts on that?
Hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a little bit of a partial remodel, so pardon me. First of all, thank you to all of you. I just would like to sort of copy everybody else's comments. This is an incredible panel, and I'm honored to be part of it. And I love what you said, and it's interesting because usually when we talk about where America is compared to other countries, we focus a lot on CEDAW, which of course the United States is not ratified, and there's only another 6 or 7 countries in the world that have not. And we talk about world index numbers and with respect to equal pay. But the one thing that I have learned in talking with young people, which I'm thrilled to have Rosie here, is when you tell a young person particularly, do you realize that there actually are many other countries in the world with specified equal rights in their constitutions, and we don't have that. One thing through World Affairs, I've been speaking to international groups, members of parliament, and heads of NGOs for about 6 years. And the first group I met with was a group of women. One was from Nepal, one Pakistan, and one Afghanistan. And when we talked about this, the woman from Pakistan said, well, actually, we're ahead of you. We have specified equality in our constitution. So then the conversation progressed to, well, how's the enforcement going? And right. So
Leanne, yeah.
I appreciate all of the comments, and that was sort of what I wanted to raise, and I'll leave the rest up to the panel to talk about that. Thanks very much.
We're clearly going to have another town hall. Thank you both so much for that. There's a question for Linda Coberly. Kathleen Wright from Kentucky. Let me just read her question until we get her up. Could you briefly bring us up to speed on the most likely current path and earliest possible date for successful ERA ratification? If you could unmute yourself, Linda. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So we have now enough ratifications to put the ERA over the finish line. But there is a time limit that has to be dealt with in one way or the other. And right now, so for those of you who don't know, in the preamble to the ERA, when Congress sent the ERA to the states for ratification in 1972, it included some language saying that the ERA would become effective if ratified by 3/4 of the states within 7 years. And then those 7 years were extended by 3 more years in the late 1970s. Obviously, 1982, which was the extended date, came and went without 3/4 of the states. Now, thanks to Senator Spearman and Representative Andersson and the folks in Virginia, we have 3/4 of the states. So what do we do about that time limit? Well, there's 2 paths forward, and the ERA coalition is pursuing both. First of all, there's some litigation pending in Washington, D.C. and in Massachusetts over this issue. the lawsuit in Washington, D.C. was brought by the attorneys general of Virginia, Illinois, and Nevada, and it seeks to require the National Archivist to recognize the ERA as valid under the Constitution. That motion or that lawsuit is being briefed right now. The government has moved to dismiss it on the ground that there's a deadline, and the deadline should have the effect of getting in the way of the effectiveness of the amendment. The states, Virginia, Illinois, and Nevada, will be arguing that the deadline can't get in the way of the amendment because Article 5 of the Constitution is what determines when an amendment becomes valid. And Article 5 of the Constitution doesn't include a deadline, doesn't even leave room for a deadline. So that's the first path forward. The second path forward, which we're also pursuing, is to simply have the deadline removed. That is the bill that has now passed in the House and is pending in the Senate, thanks to Senators Murkowski and Cardin. And in my view, that would probably be the fastest path, because if whether you believe a deadline is effective or not, once Congress put it in there, Congress can certainly remove it. And so that's what we're attempting to do in Washington by lobbying our legislators to pass the bill to remove the deadline. And we're very close. We're very close. We need a few more votes in the Senate side to make that happen. Now, even if that didn't happen, the lawsuits could still lead to the effectiveness of the ERA by ruling that a deadline simply isn't effective to stand in the way of Article 5. And those are the arguments that are going to be made there. So there's two different paths. They're actually quite consistent with one another, and they're both being pursued at the same time.
Thank you so much, Linda. And Kathleen, thank you so much for your question. That was the big question, right? We now have a question for Steve Andersson by Marcy Sims, who is the chair of the Fund for Women's Equalities. Marcy.
Can you see me?
Can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not doing something right here. Share screen. Share.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Anyway, so let me ask the question, Steve, because in watching Mrs. America, I'm sure here I am.
There we go. Hi, Marcy.
Hi, Steve. In watching, and everyone else, in watching Mrs. America, there's a lot of discussion that is fresh, that is new to people, to the cause of the equal rights and the situation in the United States that we are so behind. And looking at it through the lens of the 70s, there seems to be a theme that has completely met with us here in 2020. And that is, how do we describe to our pro-life friends that the ERA is not abortion on demand? How do we parse this issue in a convincing, simplistic as you can with a complicated issue?
No, that's right. That's right. And that's the key. And I'm glad you asked the question, because as I've said in other occasions, the opponents to the ERA have a very easy tagline. They just say, oh, the ERA equals abortion. I'm against it because I'm pro-life, right? And that's the end. They don't have to explain it any further. The problem with our side is we have to explain. And when you explain, like you said, it's got to be a simple answer. It's got to be concise for it to be carried forward. Because one thing for Linda Coberly to explain it, she's a lawyer, or me to explain it, I'm a lawyer. But can the senator repeat it when he gets yelled at by one of his pro-life constituents? That's the key, is how do we say it? So the way that I like to talk about it is to say that, number one, we have an enormous amount of states that have state level ERAs, identical to the one that we're going to pass here at some point for the United States Constitution. In no state has abortion on demand become legal. In fact, nothing about those state level ERAs trumps or changes the dynamic that Roe versus Wade established in all the cases beyond that. It simply doesn't exist. And then if you take it one step further, there have been a few cases, maybe two that are important, where the ERA at a state level has been mentioned in the ERA at the state level has been mentioned in an abortion case, public funding for abortion. One in Connecticut, one in New Mexico, if my recollection is correct. And so that is pointed to by the opponents, and they'll say, ha ha, we knew it. See, abortion, ERA, it's a horrible, horrible thing. But if you look even just a little bit closer, what you will find is all those cases said was that you can't redefine the concept of medical necessity. You can't have one definition of medical necessity for men and a different one for women. Well, this relates back to what most pro-life people believe, what I certainly believe, which is that there are appropriate exceptions for the health and life of the mother. If you believe that, those cases are perfectly consistent. So the hard thing about it is what I just told you, that required you to pay a little attention, right? And now try to get a senator's time for that or one of their constituents. And again, they'd have to repeat it. So I'm not the be all and the end all on how to preach this, but the idea would be we've got to make it simple, and we've got to convince these supporters and the senators and anyone who is potentially opposed. We have to convince them with some real positive pressure that we're not asking them to vote against their conscience on abortion. It's a different issue. You want to fight that issue another day. We're not asking that here. We're asking for a very simple proposition, equal rights for everybody. So the more we can push that and push it with what I call positive pressure, the better we are. And what I mean by positive pressure is when you go to a senator and you say, I'm going to vote you out, well, they get a lot of that. And if you're a Democrat, which they'll know, you were already going to vote against them. So that's not going to make a lot of difference. So the reality is you need to find people like me, pro-life Republicans, who are willing to say, I'm with you, Senator so-and-so. When you vote for this, I'm still going to be there for you. I'm going to be there after the vote, not just before the vote. That's positive pressure. That's supporting those people and getting them to do what they already know is the right thing to do. Like Senator Cardin said, everybody knows this is the right history. We just have to convince them that they're going to be safe when they do it.
Right. Steve and Marcy, thanks so much. Great question. For Rosie Couture, Braden Millem has a question for you. She's from Kennesaw State University in Georgia. Braden?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
We can now. Thank you, Braden.
Okay. Hi, I'm Braden Milam. I'm from Kennesaw State University, just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I know some of the panelists have talked about this before, but I wanted to talk to you, Rosie, about engagement and organization, especially because Governor Kemp, who is our Republican governor, has just lifted our shelter-in-place order. So people who want to stay at home are losing access and unemployment, or access to healthcare, unemployment issue, or insurance and housing. And all of that has incited calls for action. So my question essentially boils down to safety and activism. So, what should we do when it's not safe to have physical gatherings? How do we effectively advocate for change while taking precautions to keep, ourselves and our community safe?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your question. And I actually lived in Atlanta for 6 or 7 years. So I love that. Yes, absolutely. COVID-19 has changed the game in a lot of ways for how people can mobilize and come together and fight for change. But in a lot of ways, it's still the same. And I think this is especially relevant to youth activism and organizing young people. We organize so much digitally already, and we already use social media so much, and we need to keep that going as we are in this time where we need to be staying home to keep ourselves safe. With that said, there are so many things that you can do, especially for the ERA. You can still contact your legislators. You can even schedule digital meetings with them. Generation Ratify has kids from across the country who are actually still meeting with some senators and also some state representatives, especially in North Carolina. Our North Carolina team is amazing. I don't know if Ben is on here and watching. But also there are so many ways, although I am all for like keeping up the pressure on the ERA and other pieces of legislation and not letting up that fight. The election is right around the corner. It is in November, and there is a lot that people can be doing to elevate the issues they care about with talking about the election. And there's a lot of things that people can do digitally, such like text banking, phone banking, all of that fun stuff, and all of those digital voter contacts that people can be doing. I also think now is a super important time to build community and just bring people together for the sake of like being together and being there for one another. I think that it is so important in activism to be taking care of the people that you're working with and to really be there for each other. And so now it's such a good time to just like be bringing people together on events and digital events like this, on this town hall, and just doing general education. But just building community is so important during this time, and taking care of yourself and your well-being and mental health and recuperating and fighting against burnout.
Great. Thank you both, Rosie and Braden, for that question. Great to see you. Now we have a question from Sally Menard, the FDR for Freedom's Park Conservancy and the ERA Coalition. Sally, do you have a question? And we're going to throw it out to everyone. I think we'll do a round robin as closing statements to Sally's question. Sally, thanks so much for being with us in so many ways.
You're welcome. Am I on? Do you hear me?
We do.
Great. Well, I'm just so excited to be part of this and to listen to you all speak from one generation to another generation to another generation. And it's time to end this issue, isn't it? It's time to make it happen. So I really don't have a question at the moment because you've all been asking the questions that I have. You know, I love the fact, Rosie, that you guys are so digitally embedded now. And this is your menu, this is your medium. And we're all getting into it. We're all learning it, and we'll all be leveraging it as hard as we can. I did have the pleasure, thanks to Carol, of being on the floor when Jackie Speier's legislation was passed. And it was such a celebration because I've been working on this since 1980 when we were recruited by the Advertising Club of New York City to be a volunteer agency for the passage of the ERA. I've been watching Miss America this week. It's so painful to me because we were called into action as volunteers to do advertising with one voice because Phyllis Schlafly was so powerful and all our organizations at the time were operating separately. So at a certain point, they pulled the organizations together and they agreed to back one campaign, one strategy in the unratified states. And it was the failure to get those 3 states that we needed by spring of '82 that really convinced me that the way to do it is change the people making the policy. Because the states we were advertising in, all the legislatures were men, lovely men, I'm sure, but not sympathetic to our cause. And that's when I stopped supporting Save the Whales and started supporting women candidates initially, and then women and men who believe the same things that all of us believe in. So I'm very optimistic because of the passion and the intelligence and the commitment of the people in this town hall. And Carol, thanks for giving me a chance to say so.
Great, Sally, thanks. So why don't we go around, because what Sally has been asking all along is what can we do, you know, and other people have been asking as well. So as we close, let's go around. Let's start with Linda and say what it is that you think needs to be done. What can people watching this do next? And if you could unmute yourself, and this is like a very quick round robin.
You bet. Call your legislators and call people who live in states with Republican senators. They're the ones who need convincing. And one thing I've learned is that senators don't want to hear from me because I'm from Illinois. My Illinois senators want to hear from me. But call your friends and your colleagues and have them call their senators. That's the way to get this done.
Rosie, quick advice.
Yes, going off of Linda, Contact your legislators. It is so important to keep up your voice. Visit generationratify.org and text all your friends about the ERA and post about it on social media.
Steve?
Thank you. I'm going to say the same sort of thing, but if you can find your friends, your moms and your dads, people you know that are Republicans, that you can get to join this cause, the better we will be. Because everybody keeps talking about being bipartisan, and it is and it should be, but there needs to be more of that. So I call you all that you have to be bipartisan. You have to reach out to people, because I'm guessing a lot of y'all on the line are maybe not Republicans. You've got to be bipartisan. You got to reach out and find those people. You do that, we change the world.
Thanks, Stephen. Pat, your 20 seconds.
And I was going to say ditto to everyone, what everyone else has said, but the other thing that I would say is fill out the census. They have to know how many of us are around, and we can simply overwhelm them with the numbers, and they'll recognize whether Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or whatever. Women are growing and our voices will be heard. We're done being second-class citizens. That's why we vote.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'm in New York City and I can hear out of my window my neighbors cheering for the essential workers, which means that it is 7 o'clock. And we have come to the end of our program. We'll definitely do this again. I want to thank all of our panelists, all of our questioners, the audience watching on Facebook Live and here on Zoom. We are very encouraged by your enthusiasm for this program. We'll have another town hall on May 27th. That's violence against women and the ERA. We hope you'll join us for that. We'll be sending out information about it. In the meantime, please go to our website at eracoalition.org. We have an advocacy map there that you could click on, and we'll put you in contact with your senators. We think it's important now, but all of your representatives, to implore them to support SJ Res 6 in the Senate. That's our, we've got to get that done. And thank you all so much. We will see you the next time. Thanks to Bettina Hager, Marianne Stack, Catherine Geraldo, Jessica Newworth, our co-founder, and our board chairs, Marcy Sims and Kimberly Peeler-Allen. I think that's it. That's all the time we have for thank yous. But we'll see you at the next town hall. And remember, we're working for an equal future here for everybody. Thanks so much. Good night.